Sometimes people belittle us for having an optimistic outlook. They say, get real. What's the balance between seeing things for what they are versus having a vision of what they can be? So there's a couple different resources that I wanted to talk about because this is helpful. I have actually it kind of struck a chord with me because I have a sister-in-law, and every single time I see her or talk to her, she goes on and on about what of an optimist I am. And she kind of like laughs about it and thinks and then she'll say, no, I think it's really great. But like you can always spin it for whatever, and I don't want to be that person that's like, doesn't see reality and like, just living in the clouds. And so I totally get what they're saying when they ask this. So there's a couple things. So we've already kind of touched on, you need to have a vision so that you can move towards something. Otherwise, you're just reacting to everything because you're either moving or you're stagnant. And so you need to have something that you're moving toward. And when you hold that vision, it creates passion, but it also creates tension. And that tension is uncomfortable because we know we're not at that vision. This is why, like, it can be emotionally easier to just throw in the towel on whatever it is, whether it's weight loss or repairing your marriage or whatever that vision is that's worth your time and energy. We do that because the tension is too much. Like holding the tension is hard. And I really believe that concept of holding tension is the spiritual principle of patience. We set a goal, we have a vision, and we have passion toward it because we know it's worth moving toward, but it's very uncomfortable. And the longer we have to hold, the bigger the vision, the longer we have to hold the tension. If it's like, I'm going to go to heaven, like we have to hold tension all our lives. We have to hang on to the thing we want while we, try to live a certain way. And so what people are tempted to do is to back off the vision. But the problem with backing off of the vision is that then the passion decreases. And sometimes we give up on the goal altogether because this watered down version of it is not what we really want. It's not what we're really going for. It's the big thing that we're going for. And of course, every mistake and failure we have along the way is going to get us closer, right? But we have to be up for that. We have to be willing to fail if we're going to create, because failure is inherent in every creation, whether it's parenthood or, building a house. Failure is inherent. And so when we show up trying to be optimistic, it's us really trying to hold a vision. We're trying to say things can be better than they are. But the only way that we can hang on to that vision and have enough passion is to hold the tension. And the only way to hold the tension properly, because what she's talking about is the difference between those two things. Is that person stuck in the clouds with the vision? Do they really see reality? Do they really know? And maybe, let's say, for example, someone needs to lose 100 pounds and they start telling everybody, yeah, I'm going to be thin soon. I'm going to lose all this weight. And then people get worried, right? So what's happening on the other end when the person is like, oh, just be real, is that person believes that they have a true sense of the reality of the situation and that you don't. They think that your optimism is a reflection of your inability to see reality as it is. And maybe they've tried the thing you're doing and it didn't work out for them and they've already given up. So why should it work for you? Or maybe they think that you have a habit of not seeing reality. Or maybe they're a pessimist and they can only see reality and they don't hold a vision. So I had a couple thoughts going into this because this book, Creating, does a good job of talking about. So this is actually a little visual that you can see there where you have your current reality and you have your vision and then you have your tension, right? And so he actually gives some tips for seeing reality properly. And then I thought we'd touch on the powerful engagement really quick. He says, okay, so once you know what end result you want or your vision, what's the next step? Most people think the answer is to figure out how to get there, but that's not the next best step. The best next step is to describe what you currently have in relationship to the result you want. This is a step that is conspicuously absent in many systems designed specifically to help you attain what you want. And this is where New Ageism falls short. This is where a lot of the self-help stuff falls short. They don't do a good enough job at encouraging you to be super honest about where you are. And so many people, like, they join, I don't know, multi-levels or whatever the case might be. They jump into something, they jump into marriage blindly without being honest about their current reality. In the real creative process, as practiced by artists, inventors, composers, and architects, the current circumstances are always in view once the end result has been envisioned. Current reality as a stage begins after the vision has been formed. It is also an ongoing stage in the creative process in the sense that you should always be aware of the current state of the creation while it develops. In the beginning of the creative process, there will be a discrepancy between what you want and what you have. This discrepancy forms a tension. Tension seeks resolution. The tension is a wonderful force because as it moves towards resolution, it generates energy that is useful in creating. I call the relationship between the vision and the current reality structural tension. And he actually tells this really fascinating story where they did a day-long workshop and he wanted to superficially create tension for the attendees so that they could have a sense of what it felt like to have a relationship with it when he got to that point in the workshop. And so all he did was he had a table up front and he put a pitcher of water and some glasses and he just set them there. And it created tension because people didn't understand why it was there. They didn't understand what its purpose was. He never did anything with it. And then every once in a while, like when he was leaving stage, he would just pour some water into a glass, or somebody else would come onto stage and pour a little bit of water into a glass from a glass or whatever. And so this went on all throughout the day. And by the end of the day, he had this big, long debrief, and I could read you pages and pages. It's super fascinating. But people in the audience became so uncomfortable with trying to figure out why these glasses were there that they started interfering with them or making up stories about what they meant. And so the reason it's so important that we hold reality when we're trying to create is because if we don't, we'll make up stories that aren't true to try to describe why things aren't working, and we'll get caught up in lies and untruths. And so we have to know reality and we have to keep assessing it. So, and the way that they reacted to the glasses was a common coping mechanism in their life that they could see. So like one woman went and drank some of it. Some guy went and poured different cups in different glasses to see if the instructors noticed. Some people started raising their hands to try to get answers. Some people told unhealthy stories about the presenters. They gossiped about them. So fascinating. And so as we're trying to be creators and we're trying to be optimistic, and we're trying to move forward, this is kind of a huge empty space. In The Power of TED, he does talk about it some, but there's more that we can do. So structural tension is a fundamental principle in the creative process. In fact, part of your job as a creator is to form this tension. So let's explore the tension through a specific example. If what you want to create happens to be a dinner party for 6 people on a Tuesday night, roast leg of lamb, fine wine, witty people enjoying each other's company, beautiful ambiance and decor, along with a spectacular dessert, what would you want to include as a description of current reality? Those facts are especially relevant. For example, today is Monday. 4 of the 6, including myself, have been invited and have said yes. The other 2 people I want to invite have not been reached. I have ordered a leg of lamb at the butcher's, and although I have not done any of the shopping, my wine cellar is full and ready to be called upon. My English china is in the cabinet, but is in need of a good cleaning, and so on. As you can see, there's a discrepancy between my current state and my desired state, and this creates structural tension, and now I'm prepared to take actions to bring my current state to the level of my desired state. So a good example of this that I can think of off the top of my head is my son wants to go to a specific college. And so he keeps having the vision of this college, but he doesn't have a clear enough vision of his current reality. Or if he does have a vision of it, it can sometimes be negative. And so because he doesn't have a positive, a clear perception of his reality of like all his talents, all his gifts, all his resources, the tension turns into discouragement and he gives up on the goal. So you have to really know what resources you have at your disposal. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because for whoever this is, if they watch this later, whatever this question, wherever this came up, if they can assess their reality honestly and communicate the reality that they see when people call them like their head in the clouds and they're just being this eternal optimist that doesn't see reality, they just can communicate reality. Hey, I know this, that, XYZ. And then it diffuses any concerns that the people around them might have that they're not being realistic. And so you can say, look, I want this thing and I know this, that, and the other thing have to happen. And I know I'm limited in these particular ways, but this is how I'm working on that. And it puts you, it's like the principle that evidence increases faith. It's like, because you know reality and what your resources are, you can more optimistically move toward your goal. Usually people do not list their current reality so formally, but if you did, you would have an easier time organizing your actions toward the final result you wanted. And so I'm actually just about like with this son that I'm talking about, we've been talking in circles for a little while, and I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to sit with him and actually have him list his resources and look at his current reality really honestly so that he can start to move toward his goal in a way that's going to be realistic. An essential part of the creative process is taking actions that will change reality. As the current reality changes, you as a creator need to be intimate with that change. When I first began to teach people the creative process, I assumed that people would have some difficulty in forming the end results they wanted, but that they would have no difficulty in noting where they were, since reality is always there to see. Boy, was I wrong. People had very little trouble generating the end results that they wanted. Once they began developing visions, people could do it endlessly. But when it came to accurately describing current reality, people often did not do as well. What's going on, I wondered. Much of the innovation on the subject, so he talks about this other book, came from the human behavior I described in the path of least resistance came from observing the nature of the distortions people made in attempting to describe reality accurately. So, descriptions of those elements that make it hard for you to accurately describe the current state of reality follow in part 2. So he goes on, how does the inability to discern reality actually impair the creative process? If you are not fluent in the current reality that exists in your life and in your creations, it will be difficult for you to act in favor of your creations. So, and then of course, the chapter for whoever this was, to return again to the section on realistic optimism in the powerful engagement. I love those first couple pages of how they discuss what that means to have a realistic optimism. And that's what we want. We want a realistic optimism, but that, and he, like Robert Fritz spends a bunch of time in this book on creating, and he has a whole other book that talks about it even more, because he sees a huge breakdown in anybody creating anything. And actually being a creator mindset, one of the biggest roadblocks is that they can't be honest with themselves about reality. They're afraid to see that there is that big discrepancy in order to move toward the goal, and this kind of goes to like, and I don't know if you're at this point, Tanya, but the subhuman, superhuman stuff that we talk about with the power in leadership and self-deception. So the person who thinks, I don't need to look at reality because I'll just figure it out, or the person who says, reality is too hard, I'm just never going to do it. And both of those are really destructive. Looking at reality and saying, well, this is my reality, so that means I can't create the thing. Neither of those are true. You just need to know what you need. You can't know what you need unless you see reality. So that's kind of a long answer to how do I deal with that? But if you know that you're assessing reality properly and you're really working hard to be honest, and you've gone to people who know you well and had conversations about what do you think are going to be some roadblocks for me to get there? And what do I need to accomplish this? then if anybody ever gives you grief or tells you that you can't do it, you can say to yourself, no, no, no. I mean, I know what it's going to take, but I've taken stock of that and I'm making plans for that. I know what it's going to take for me to get there. I just have to do the steps, because the better you know reality, the better steps you're going to take. I mean, a really good example of this as we finish up, I guess, would be my oldest son, because he's been a very successful, he has a really impressive portfolio for video editing, and he's done pretty much everything there is to do kind of in the film world, especially in the like advertising space, but he wants to get into the narrative space. And so the way he was saying it the other day is, I've kind of been running parallel to the thing I really want most, and I have a ton of the skills, but I'm not quite in that space. And because he's missing some skills, he feels like he needs some education. So he's been thinking for months about going to art school, but it wasn't until he got into the details and looked at the reality. And that meant, at first he was like, okay, well, I'll go find the best schools. And so he made a list of the best schools and he kind of perused their websites. And then he was like, maybe I'll just apply. Oh, no. And so the more of the reality that he assessed, he talked to friends, and then he found people who'd gone to those schools. And then he had detailed conversations with the counselors. And now he knows that he can get to a top tier art school, but it's going to take a year and it's going to take 3 or 4 steps. So he used to be really like 6 or 8 months ago, he didn't even believe he could get into a top tier art school. Like, he was like, that could never happen. I could never be that guy. Like, I could never get there. And then he spent a lot of his spare time over the last few months assessing the reality of, okay, who gets into these schools? How hard is it? What do their portfolios look like? He's sent portfolios in to school counselors and had them give feedback on what he's missing, and where is he really at? How good is he really? How does he really compare? What does he need in terms of his school credits? What does he need in terms of grades? What does he need in terms of portfolio? And now that he knows the reality, he actually has the most faith he's ever had. He actually feels the most optimistic and excited. He knows how to manage the tension. It feels realistic to take the steps for the next year, so that in a year from the fall, he could be really applying to those schools, because he knows what steps he has to take and they feel realistic. So anyway, really fascinating, but so helpful. And that's, we kind of introduced this creative process. I've been thinking about how maybe we could introduce, as I learned more, like more workshops or more helps as women move along in the academy around this, and more practice around this, because to understand it is mind-blowing and life-changing. But then the more you get into the practical tools of it, like the more helpful it can be in so many ways.